All right, welcome back to Financial Clarity for Doctors. I'm Corey Janoff, joined as always by Rachelle Vanderzanden.
Hello.
And today we wanted to bust some myths, some financial
hmm
planning myths. There's a lot of information out there, especially if you're looking on the internet. And I think it's actually gotten a lot better over the years. Like the general knowledge and awareness has improved vastly when it comes to investing and financial planning. So all positive stuff. But there's still some misconceptions out there, and a lot of things with financial planning. It really depends on your circumstances. Our favorite phrase, it depends. So something that might be an appropriate recommendation or rule of thumb for one person might be the opposite of what another person should be doing. So it really depends on what's going on, what the objectives are, what the purpose is, you know, etc. So very many assumptions in life, some of them good, some of them not so good. Eat your vegetables, probably a good one. Wear sunscreen, probably a good one. There's also ones out there that probably aren't so good. Rochelle, can you think of any negative
I don't know.
isms?
Get all your vitamins from vitamins? No, you should probably, I don't know. You guys are doctors. You know better than me.
Yeah. So what's the food pyramid? Didn't it used to be all carbs at the
Oh,
bottom, and then they're
they've
like,
like
we need,
rebuilt that 50
yeah.
times. Yeah.
So things change over time.
Yep.
But anyways, so we want to talk about some things that you might commonly hear regarding financial planning that may or may not be right for you. So
hmm
where do you want to start, Rochelle?
Mm, all over the place. But let's start with financial planning in general. So I think there is a common misconception, maybe not for you all because you listen to us talk all the time, but there's a common misconception that you can go about and set up a financial plan, like just create it, make your plan, and then you're set. I did it. Good job, me. But no, obviously that's not the case. You must revisit like your finances from time to time and your financial plan from time to time because things change. Your goals will change, your income will change, and then you will need to make adjustments. So it's a good idea to just maybe think about at least once a year, sitting down, reviewing your finances, seeing where you're at in relation to your goals, making sure you're revisiting those goals and seeing if any of that has changed and then making adjustments as needed because that will change over time. You just can't set it up and then be like, "We're done. Let's forget about it." Moving
Yeah,
on.
financial planning definitely an ongoing task, not a one and done deal. So
Absolutely.
another one. We don't have any particular order to these here, but here's one that you sometimes hear out there. Cars are a waste of money. You should never buy an expensive car. Find the cheapest, you know, reliable vehicle that gets you from point A to point B, or never buy a new car, only buy a used car. Never lease, only buy, etc. So sure, cars, depreciating asset. You're probably not going to be able to sell it for more than you bought it for. But by that logic, get a bicycle and commute. But most people, they need a form of transportation to get them safely and reliably from one location to another, especially if you have kids. You gotta, get enough seats for the whole family and the dog and the luggage, etc. Um, Now, never buy an expensive car. Well, I think that's relative to your circumstances. Like, sure, if you're a college student and you don't have a lot of money to throw around, you probably shouldn't have $1,000 a month car payment. But if you're making $1 million a year and you want to buy $100,000 car, go for it. Especially if you're on track to reaching your other financial planning goals. If you're saving enough for retirement, you're putting enough aside to pay for the amount of college you want to pay for the kids, student loans are paid off, etc. By all means, splurge on a car if that's important to you. If you enjoy cars, teach their own. So, and
hmm
same with anything in life. You could make the same argument about, oh, you shouldn't spend money on a nice vacation. You shouldn't buy nice clothes. You should just buy the smallest, least expensive house that gets the job done. It's like, there are some benefits to having, comfort in life, and especially if you can afford it, why not go for the thing that's maybe a little bit nicer, more comfortable for you?
Yep. Some of these are related, but I think another common one that I hear is that you should always pay for a car in cash, period. If you don't have enough money to buy it in cash, you shouldn't buy it. I don't think that's the case at all. And obviously, everything depends on your individual circumstances. But, if you have 40 grand and you need to buy a car and that's how much the car costs, like, sure, you could buy that car and pay for it in cash. But what else could you do with your 40 grand? Like if the car interest rate is 2% and you could potentially put that money into like a brokerage account or fund your Roth IRA or do all sorts of other things, and that money can potentially grow at like 7 to 9% long term, like maybe it's a better use of your money to get some money invested sooner because with investments, generally, like the more money you can get in sooner, the better off you're going to be. So just make sure you're considering things like interest rates when you're buying a new car. If interest rates are 6 or 7%, like, okay, maybe we don't want to pay that interest. Let's pay for the car in cash at least as much as possible. But when interest rates are really low, it can be beneficial to use that money for something else instead. If you're going to do it, like, use that money for something beneficial that's worthwhile. If you're just going to spend it, like, maybe it's not worthwhile, but, to each their own again. Like, if you have money to do both, then why not do both?
Yeah, kind of along the same lines. Debt
Mm-hmm.
is bad. You should never have debt. And as I say that, I'm picturing Mr. Mackey from South Park in my head. Debt is bad. Okay. Um, horrible impression right there. But so debt, if if it's a tool, and if used inappropriately, it can be bad. If used appropriately, it can allow you to pull forward some of your objectives and goals faster than you'd otherwise be able to achieve them. So, the car example, maybe you don't have enough cash to buy a car, but you need a new car. You could do take out a loan to purchase that car. Same with a house. If you had to pay cash for a house, if mortgages didn't exist, the home ownership rate would be significantly smaller than it is currently. And you probably wouldn't be able to buy your first home ever, maybe. I mean, 40s, I don't know. I guess it depends how aggressively you're going to save to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So if used prudently, it can be a great tool to help accelerate your your financial objectives. But there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of variables at play. We got to look at the debt balance, the interest rate. Can you afford the payments? Yeah, they're all intertwined and it's case by case basis. Generally speaking, the higher the interest rate, the worse the debt, the more we want to avoid it, or the faster we want to pay it off. Um, but everyone's circumstances are different. Depends on how long you plan to hold the debt for, how quickly you can get rid of it, etc. Lower interest rate debts, more comfortable stretching those payments out for longer, generally speaking. So, but case by case for all of it.
Mm-hmm. On the debt topic, I think there's another one that you commonly hear that's like you should pay off your lowest balance debt first. And there are a lot of different ways that you can approach debt repayment, but generally that's not going to be the most efficient way to do it. Usually, what you want to do instead is just try to attack the one that has the highest interest rate because whatever dollars you have to put towards your debt, like that's going to go the farthest. That's going to have the biggest impact on your financial plan. So, if we're using like a couple of examples, let's say like you have a couple of credit cards with a balance and like, maybe you're in training or something like that and you're really struggling with debt and you've got cards that like one of them has a $10,000 balance and it's charging you 25% interest rate, which is awful. And then you have like a $2,000 credit card balance that's only charging you 15%. And let's say you only have $2,000 to put towards your debt. Like you could put $2,000 towards that 15% interest rate card and wipe it out entirely. And then you wouldn't have the balance on that card anymore. And that's going to save you that 15% in interest. Or you could put that $2,000 towards the card that has the $10,000 balance. And sure, like you still have both cards. You have one with $2,000 and one with $8,000 on it now. But the $2,000 that you're putting towards that highest interest rate debt is saving you 25% in interest. Like that's a bigger impact to your financial plan if you attack the debt by the highest interest rate debt first. So it can feel nice to like pay off something entirely, but also like it feels really good when you're not paying that interest. And that's kind of the thing that you need to focus on when you have money to put towards debt. Like, where is this going to have the biggest impact?
Yeah, from a math perspective, highest interest rate first is the way to go. I could understand the logic in paying the small one. It's a little win. You feel good about yourself, motivates you to keep plowing
Hmm.
ahead. But yeah, generally speaking, go after that highest interest rate debt. Home ownership. This is a big one. You need to
Hmm.
own a house to be financially successful or to, get ahead financially, however you want to phrase it. Um, while there is a correlation between home ownership and net worth, generally speaking, people who own their home have a much higher net worth than people who rent, but not always the case. And I think some of that might be correlation rather than causation. Buying a house doesn't necessarily guarantee you to have um, a higher net worth, but people with higher net worths and higher incomes are more likely to buy a house, I think, than people with
Because they
lower
can afford
incomes.
it. Hmm.
Exactly. So yeah, Rochelle and I, we're both homeowners long term. I think it is beneficial to own your home rather than rent because you get the price appreciation over time. You have that asset to your name. It's kind of like a forced savings vehicle. Historically speaking, residential real estate appreciates in line with inflation. So it's not going to be a great investment, but you need a place to live. And if you can live and some of that money that you're putting towards your housing cost is going into a essentially a savings vehicle that you can ultimately get back one day when you go to sell the home. I think that's worthwhile. Now, as a homeowner, there's a lot of costs associated with owning a home, as any of you can relate. The maintenance is never ending. There's always something that comes up that needs to get fixed. So, um, you want to make sure you're up for the task and you can afford to own the home that you're looking at, because otherwise it's really expensive to be a homeowner if you can't afford it or if you need to move right after you bought a home. So, in some cases, renting can be more financially beneficial, even over the long run, depending on what city you're in. If the cost to rent is a third of the price of the cost to own, well, shoot, might make more sense to rent in that case from a pure financial perspective.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think that's definitely one that makes sense to look at on a case by case basis. Like if your rental costs are going to be significantly lower than a mortgage cost and like the mortgage interest you're paying, it might make sense to rent longer term. So that's kind of the next one. Like the opposite assumption or the flip side of that is that renting is throwing money away. It's not. It's putting a roof over your head. Like you have to live somewhere. If you have a mortgage payment, the idea is that, okay, like this mortgage is building equity in this home. And it is to a certain extent, but it's also paying interest to a bank. So like whether you're renting or you're owning, you are paying someone else to be there, if assuming you have a mortgage, unless you pay it in cash. So renting can be a good solution, either temporarily or potentially for some people longer term, if you're living in an area where like the cost to buy is just prohibitive. And then in some places, it just is significantly less expensive to rent. And if that allows you to save more for retirement and to maybe live life a little bit better. Like maybe you can go on a vacation because you're not house poor. Like renting can be a good solution for some people. So it's not necessarily that renting is always better. It's just one of those things where you want to make sure you're carefully considering that in your own situation before we like make the assumption that we should be buying a house and that renting is throwing away money.
yeah, like if you look at a mortgage amortization schedule, the first 5 years, pretty much all of your mortgage payment goes to interest. It's pretty depressing how much is
Yep.
going to interest relative to principal, and then tack on property taxes, home insurance, and maintenance. Yeah,
Yep.
short term, you probably are better off renting for 5 years or less. Now, 5+ years, and 5 years is kind of just an arbitrary line in the sand, but the longer you plan to own that home and stay in that home for, um, the more beneficial it becomes financially because you have a fixed, most people have a fixed mortgage payment, housing costs that's not going to change, whereas rent will likely increase over time. So you lock in that payment for, in theory, 30 years if you stay in
Hmm.
that home for 30 years. Um, so again, the longer you plan to stay there, the more attractive home ownership is. But yeah, renting, not definitely not throwing money away. It
Hmm.
in some cases can be better. Another one, save 10% of your income for retirement. So at least 10%, I think, is a common rule of thumb. But I think that also assumes you start working right out of college in your early 20s and you work until your mid 60s. and you get a match from your employer, and you also get Social Security. So you kind of are counting on a few other variables there. We generally advise doctors to save at least 20% of their income. And we've got another example here later on that'll help highlight this, because you guys are getting a later start. So you're not starting your retirement savings at 22. You're more likely starting it at 32. Maybe in residency, you are contributing to a Roth IRA, maybe a brokerage account if you're an overachiever. But you're not really saving a whole lot in your 20s, because half of your 20s you're literally a student, and then the back half you're in training, making not a whole lot of money. So that's assuming you just go straight from college to med school to residency. So, I mean, you take a little bit of a gap in between before med school. But yeah, most doctors don't really start their retirement savings until their 30s. So you got to play catch up and save more. So you have less
Mm-hmm.
time, assuming you still want to retire by your early 60s, which the average retirement age in America is like 62, 63 years old. Some of that is health related. Not everyone
Mm-hmm.
can work to 70, even though they may want to. Um, so yeah, save more than 10. Probably save at least 20. The more, the better. At the same time, we want to make sure we enjoy living today. So we have some stories to share in retirement, and nothing's guaranteed. You may not even make it to retirement, but try and save at least 20%.
Yeah, that's one that's hard to argue against sometimes. I have a couple of clients who are like, my parents passed away young. Like, I don't want to live for tomorrow all the time. Like, that just is not what I want to do. And I'm like, okay, as long as you're willing to work longer because you're not saving a lot. Like if you're willing to work until you're 70 because you want to make sure you're living today, cool. Like that's your choice. You get to do that. Yeah, okay. Related point here. I think there's kind of a common misconception, maybe not so common, but if you're maxing out your retirement plan at work, so the IRS maximum this year for an employee is 23,500, they don't let you put any more in than that, assuming that you just have that one retirement plan at work. So sometimes the assumption is like, hey, I put every dollar that I was allowed to put into my 401k or my 403b. That should be enough. Moving on. I did it. Check mark. But if we're aiming for maybe 20% of your gross income being saved for retirement and you're earning $200,000 a year, like even just 200,000, then that means your goal is $40,000 of savings. So maxing out your 401k just doesn't get you there when you are making like a good income and you're earning quite a bit of money. So make your savings goals based on how much you're earning, not necessarily like how much you are allowed to put into certain buckets. And you have to come up with other places to save money if you're maxing that out and you still need to save more. So don't let that be like that little check mark is great to have. We want to be able to do that, but sometimes we need to be doing more than that, like just above and beyond.
Yep.
Yep.
Another one, Social Security is going to go bankrupt, and then younger generations won't receive anything. And maybe even current and older generations won't receive any more. So, sure, yeah. And the Mayans predicted the end of the world in 2011, but here we are. I will be dumbfounded if Social Security goes away in my lifetime. Never say never. Things change. I mean, maybe they'll replace it with something else, change the name, but that's just marketing, not getting rid of it. Um, I think like almost half of retirees, I think it's 40% or so, rely exclusively on Social Security to cover their living expenses in retirement. It's the biggest social safety net we have. We need a social safety net to survive as a society. Otherwise it's every man for themselves, and we're, fighting with sticks and stones. But yeah, there's no way the politicians, as dishonorable and crooked as they may be, are going to let Social Security go away. It's in their best interest to keep it around. Last time Social Security was running out of money was in the early 80s. They made some tweaks to it, made it last another, 50 years essentially. So same thing is
Mhm.
going to happen, is my prediction. I could be wrong, but they're going to make some tweaks. They're going to change some things. It'll extend the life of it. I mean, other countries are extending their retirement age, some cases into their 70s. Right now, the earliest you can claim Social Security is age 62, and full retirement is age 67, and delayed retirement is age 70. Wouldn't be surprised if they kick those years out a little bit. So early is 64, full is 70, and delayed is 75. I don't know. I'm making stuff up as we go here, but probably something like
Mhm.
that. Probably a slight raise to the tax base for Social Security. They're going to find ways to shore it up because too many
Yep.
people rely on it. So it's
Yep.
not going away.
I think the other thing to understand is that like there's two different sources of revenue for Social Security. So there's like a fund itself that is predicted to run out in like 2033 or something like that. But the other way Social Security is funded is by taxes that we are collecting currently. So as long as we are still paying Social Security taxes, like there's still a way to pay out benefits, even if the fund itself doesn't have money. So even if it like just happened exactly how it's kind of like scheduled to happen with running out of money in the fund, people would still get a benefit. It would just be like a reduced benefit, is what would happen if it wasn't fixed before then. So even if like the fund went bankrupt, there would be some money flowing. Like it wouldn't just go away, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, you still need workers paying into it to receive
Mm-hmm.
benefits. So as long as there's people working and paying
Yep.
taxes, there's some money there.
Yep.
Um, But yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, the fund is just like the reserve account. So in a perfect
Yeah.
world, we're
Yep.
collecting enough to pay the promised benefits and add to that reserve account. And then we have the reserve account there for times when we're in a recession, unemployment's high, we're not collecting as
Mm-hmm.
much tax for Social Security. We can still pay out benefits from that fund and then shore it up when the economy rebounds. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, anyways.
Yep.
Um,
Next one.
Next one. Go ahead.
So I think sometimes there is this myth that complicated things are better than simple things, which is so not true. I think, especially if you're kind of like managing and maintaining your own financial plan, simple is probably better. Like, you don't want to make things so complicated for yourself in your own financial plan that you're creating barriers to doing things and doing them effectively. So I would say that's like the biggest takeaway here, especially with investments and things like that. Sometimes you see people that are managing their own investments and trying to do things very complicated, like, oh, we're going to put this kind of investment in this kind of account and this kind of investment in this account because that's going to create some more tax advantages later on down the road. And then, now I'm not sure where to put my next contribution because I've made this so complicated for myself and I don't know what to do with my money and I'm sitting on $20,000 in cash because I can't figure out how to invest it. Like if you're that person, like simplify things a little bit or get some help. Like that's another good solution to that because like it doesn't make any sense to overcomplicate things for yourself and then create barriers to actually get things done. Like that's probably the more important thing. Like get it done. And if simple is better, then just do it simply.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of simple. Less is more.
Hmm.
You don't
Yeah.
need seven bank accounts. You need two. You
Yes.
consolidate all those old retirement accounts. Complicated investments versus simple investments. Generally, the more
Yeah.
complicated it is, the more expensive it is, the harder it's going to be to get your money back. And
Hmm.
no guarantees that the returns are going to be any better. In a lot of cases, they're worse because, again, more
Yeah.
expensive, more barriers or hoops to jump through, etc. So, generally speaking, go with the simpler option. But sometimes circumstances require a little more complexity. But we want there's some saying out there. I forget who said it, but it's like make things as simple as possible, but not simpler. So we don't want to like overdo it on the simplicity side, but make trying to make it as easy as possible to manage. Um,
Yep.
Moving on here, budgeting. A lot of people are big fans of budgeting. You have to
I
have a
hate that
budget.
word.
It's change the word,
Ew.
come up with a new
Ew.
one. You have to have a budget. First thing to do when it comes to financial planning is create a budget. How much are we spending on groceries? How much are we spending on restaurants? How much are we spending on entertainment, etc.? I like to do it backwards. Let's make sure we're putting enough away for our various financial objectives. Again, this is simplifying rather than creating a how much are we spending for every little thing in our lives. Let's just distill it down to a few things. How much are we saving for retirement? How much are we saving for college? How much are we putting towards getting rid of debt? If you have any other goals, great. Let's put enough towards those and then go nuts with the rest. Whatever's left over, spend it. Have fun. Like I don't care how much your grocery bill is in a given month or how much you're going to allow yourself to spend on Starbucks or whatever. Just make sure you're on track to achieving your goals and then go crazy with whatever's left over. If you have money to go on a fancy vacation, go on a fancy vacation. If you can afford to have lobster dinners every Friday night, by all means, go do that. Like I'm all for it. Like you're on track to reaching your goals. So
Yep.
enjoy what's left over.
Yep. I do like to once in a while do like the reverse thing where you kind of look at where you're spending money, just like kind of plop it in buckets and just be like, is this really where I want to be spending my money? Just like reflect on it for a second. And then you could make some adjustments if you're like, okay, this doesn't really align with like what I want and what I enjoy. I think one example is there was a year where we spent a lot on travel, and I was like, that just like travel stresses me out. Like there are people who love traveling. I am not one of them. I like it sometimes. And I was like, okay, like as a family, how do we feel about this? Because if I'm in the minority, we're not going to make a change just for me. But, if we're all like, okay, it's not really like the biggest thing that we want in our lives, and we can like shift a little money away from there to something else we actually enjoy, then let's do it. But yeah, that's just me personally.
Well, and traveling with kids, I mean, some people do it. Like our neighbors,
Uh-huh.
they have three boys and they've been
Yep.
taking them all over the world ever since they were in diapers. And
Yep.
like, more power to them.
Yep.
But the idea of flying somewhere just to have the same fights and battles and screaming and yelling and arguments and that we could have at home, like, my kids are content just digging in the mud and throwing rocks in a lake. Like I can drive 30 minutes to do that versus, go to Santorini to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Maybe
Maybe
you
as they're
do
a little
that and then
older,
maybe you leave them with the grandparents to dig in the mud and you and Lindsay go do something fun.
that would be fun. I
Mm-hmm.
agree. We're still working on a
Mm-hmm.
few things like the sleeping in their bed all night by themselves before we'd feel comfortable pawning them off on our grandparents for a week. But
You'll get there. You'll
we'll
get
get
there.
there eventually.
Okay. Another like don't worry about the small stuff kind of thing. Okay. There's like this whole thing that was a big thing on the internet for a long time. Like if you skip going to Starbucks every day and you instead invest that money, you're going to be a millionaire. It's going to be amazing. And if people could just control these little tiny things in their budget, they would be like better off financially. It's not the little things that we need to focus on. It's the big things. Like buying your coffee every day, like it shouldn't be like a big deal, especially like for people who are privileged enough that they have enough money to get by. Like if you don't have enough money to get by, then maybe we got to focus on the little things. But if we do, like it's really the big things. So it's going to be housing costs. Like that's the huge thing. It's going to be like, how many kids do you have, or do you decide to have kids? Like, these are like the really large things that have a big impact financially. It'll be like, if you do have kids, are we doing public school? Are we doing private school? So focus on the biggest things and then, kind of reverse solve around that, assuming like you're meeting your financial goals and things like that, then we probably don't need to make any changes. But if we're not meeting our financial goals, maybe we need to reassess a little bit and see like where we're spending big chunks of money and if we can make any changes there.
Yeah, focus more on the $30,000 decision, not the $3 decision. I feel like a lot of people
Yes,
spend too much time on the $3 decisions and not enough on the $30,000 decisions.
absolutely.
Um, Another one, not sure how true this is, but I think you hear it a lot, even though a lot of people may not believe it. But the I'm too young, or I don't have enough money to do financial planning or to save for retirement. Um, Warren Buffett bought his first stock at age 11, and he wishes he started investing sooner. So I think the earlier the better. Like establish those habits early on, and the sooner you can get in those habits, the more it's going to stick and be ingrained in you and just be part of your daily routine, like brushing your teeth. Like just you do it starting from the moment you have teeth. You brush them, and you do it every day, preferably twice a day. Um, Floss as well. But yeah, so like for example, if you start maxing out your Roth IRA every year at age 22 versus age 32, and you save until you're age 62, average retirement age. Right now you can do 7,000 a year. So we'll just say 7,000 a year every year for either 30 or 40 years. So if you start at age 32 and invest 7,000 a year, and let's assume it grows at 7% per year on average, you'd have about $660,000 at age 62. And we're assuming no increases to the contribution limit. So just 7,000 every single year. So that'd be like 660,000 in today dollars. In reality, it's going to be a larger number because every couple of years they increase the amount you can contribute for inflation.
Hmm.
But
Right.
7,000 a year over 30 years, you'd have 660,000 at a 7% return. If you started 10 years sooner at age 22 and saved for 40 years until age 62, you'd have 1.4 million in your Roth IRA. So just those extra 10 years more than doubles the end result. So get started early. The sooner the better. Even if it's not a huge amount, it's going to
Hmm.
add up over time. I mean, that's just a Roth IRA. You save in a Roth IRA for your full career. You're a millionaire. Throw in the 401k on top of that, you know, call it three times as much to the 401k. You'd have, another several million on top of that. So like, yeah, the sooner the better. Every time is is your biggest asset. So try to
Hmm.
maximize it as much as possible. Like the reason Warren Buffett is as wealthy as he is, it's because he's been investing for over 80 years. Like, yes, he's
And
had good
because
returns.
he's Warren
But
Buffett.
he hasn't had the best returns. There's
No, not
been
at all.
fund managers and
He had a
investors
lot of
who've had
money to
better
invest
returns than him.
eventually, too, though.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of it has just been time. Like most of
Hmm.
his wealth has come after his 60th or 70th birthday, just from
Yeah.
time and compounding. So,
Yeah, because he doesn't need it any. Like, he doesn't have to take money out of his accounts because he has so much. Yeah. Okay. That's probably something to think about more for your kids than you. We're probably like past age 22 at this point if you're listening to
but I mean,
this.
start now. If you feel like, oh, I'm going to start saving
Oh,
more
for
once I
sure.
have more,
Yeah.
like, no, just get something going now.
Sooner, yeah, sooner is better than later. But I do think that's a good idea to think about for your kids. Like if they have a summer job and you can like fund a Roth IRA for them, amazing. Like that is going to be such a huge impact for them. So in order to fund a Roth IRA, you do have to have earned income. That's probably like the biggest thing. So that can make it harder. But, if your kid has some earned income, that's a great thing to consider. Okay. Beyond that, another thing, not super related, but generally, I think sometimes people have this feeling that stocks are too risky and it's better to invest in something that won't lose money. That's something that's a little bit more stable. So, your biggest risk over time is not necessarily stock market fluctuations, it is inflation. So, every year, as you are living and saving money, inflation is making things cost more and more and more and more. So, if you're stuffing money under a mattress for retirement, you're not going to have enough unless you saved an enormous amount of money because the cost of living doubles approximately once every 24 years. So you have to save so much if you're not getting the return that you need. So, and when we say stocks are too risky, like most of the time when we're talking about investing in stocks, we're talking about like well diversified mutual funds. You're not putting all your money in one company. You're putting your money in a mutual fund that's investing in like 500 different companies or however many it is. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Over like a 20-year plus time span, stocks have never been negative in the stock market. So, like, if you give it long enough, we're going to kind of overcome any sort of downturns in the stock market. So, if we're talking about retirement money for most of us who are still fairly young and far removed from retirement, like, we're going to be okay. 95% of the time, stocks are positive over 10 plus years. So, there's like a 5% chance that over 10 years, maybe your balance will be down a bit. But again, if you give it enough time, you will do okay. And if we're well diversified, it's generally going to be a lot better success rate than that. Going back to 1872, stocks have had almost as many 20% plus positive years, 43, as negative years. So, and like even a tiny bit down. So 20% positive, almost as many as that, as like negative years where it's been even like a tiny bit negative. So there are lots of years when the stock market is up a lot. And we don't want to miss out on those years by being too conservative and being too fearful. Like you just have to invest and give it time. There was one period of time every decade, like except the 2000 to 2009 decade, which was basically like the dot-com bubble, have been positive when reinvesting dividends. And that is just the US stock market. If you had been invested in like a well-diversified portfolio with some international stock during that time, you still would have been up over that decade. It's just the domestic stock market that was down in that period.
And it
Don't
was
worry.
down like 0.1% start to
Right.
finish. It basically, they
It
call it the lost decade because
took it
it
10 years.
finished where it started. So you start the decade with the dot-com bubble bursting, and then you finish the decade with the great financial crisis. Um, bookended two major recessions and market downturns. So
Yeah.
just luck for you. But
That is the worst case scenario.
yeah, I mean, even the 1930s, which were awful, the Great
Yeah.
Depression still was positive that decade. There were some pretty bad years in there, but still finished the decade positive.
Yeah.
Speaking of investing, I think a common misconception is the goal of investing is to get the best possible returns. So, sure, we want good returns, but we also want to optimize for risk. And what's the least amount of risk we need to take in order to achieve our financial objectives? So, like if you're saving a healthy amount, you've got arguably more than you need entering retirement. Well, sure, I guess we could keep the foot on the gas pedal and invest aggressively and just try to create generational wealth. But there's also a chance you'll get a 50% down year. And then you might be anxious at that point because maybe now you don't have as much as you think you need to, especially if you're drawing from the money at that point. So de-risking and making things more conservative, like, hey, if we only need 3% returns to achieve our financial objectives, why take the risk of having a big down year? Let's just invest in treasuries right now that are giving us 4% per year and call it a day. We're set. That like overly simplified example right there, but yeah, I think it's investing for your objectives. I was reading I forget if it was a book or an article once, but there's a guy interviewing people in Boca Raton, Florida, asking them what their investment returns were over their career, and no one could remember exactly what they actually achieved return wise. And one guy said, "Who cares? I'm living in Boca Raton. Like I've got enough. I made it." So it doesn't matter what the
Yeah.
returns were. So that should be the mindset. Like, let's achieve our goals. Your goal shouldn't be get the best returns unless you're a professional investor. That shouldn't be your goal. Your goal should be
Hmm.
get to financial independence so I can live life on my own terms, work if I want to, and do the things I want to do when I want to do with whom I want to do them with.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think this is our last one. Myth debunked. Financial advisors are a waste of money. What? Who said that? I want to know. Anyway, if financial advisors were always a waste of money, like we wouldn't have jobs. Like nobody is forced to work with us. People work with us by choice. There's already like a shortage of advisors and even bigger shortage maybe of good financial advisors. And the average age is like 56 and they're pretty much all dudes. So here we are, young and not all dudes, which is great. And I think it's probably not going to get better anytime soon. But I think it's important to find a good financial advisor. Like obviously you don't want to waste money working with someone that's not really helpful to you. And if you're in a situation where you feel like financial advising is a waste of money, then you're not in the right relationship. Like it's not working for you and it makes sense to move on. So obviously, like you pay financial advisors, it costs money, whether you're paying planning fees or like a percentage of assets or something like that. There's lots of different ways that those relationships can be structured. But I think that if they are helping you meet your goals and make a plan that is working and appropriate for you and helping you make sure you have enough money invested and that it's invested like in a risk adjusted way, like we're talking about here, like those are all really, really important things and can provide value for those people that find value in that. It's also one of those things where you get to decide what you spend your time on. So if investing in financial planning is something that you really enjoy, like spending your time on, like maybe it makes sense to do it yourself. But there are lots of folks who don't necessarily want to spend their time doing that. And it's something that you can offload and also just have someone reassessing things and reviewing things with you to make sure that you're not missing things, which can be really helpful.
For sure. Yeah, it's definitely hard to put a price on having confidence in your finances and your financial outlook.
Yep.
And you guys are all smart. You are all very capable of doing your
Hmm.
own financial planning, investing, money management, but most of you aren't interested in that and don't want to do it. And even if you are, you have blind spots. And, there's a reason we have jobs and we exist because people want to work with us. Like Rochelle and I pretty much have full books of clients. Like, sure, we could potentially squeeze in a few more people if we really wanted to. We don't need to. Um, it's so and a lot of you I think that are listening to this are our clients, so you probably realize the value
Hello.
in working with us. But yeah, I think don't let anyone tell you it's a waste of money. For them, it might be a waste of money. They're doing it on their own. They're doing a good job, handling it themselves. But just like some people might say, hiring a house cleaner is a waste of money. You can clean your own house for less. Well, yeah, if
That's
you
not a
want to
waste of money.
you want to spend the time doing it, sure, go for it. But
Yeah.
you don't want to, outsource it.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, as always, thank you for listening.
We'll see you next time.